Hello and welcome. If you're listening to this story, you're about to embark on an exciting journey to learn how to think like a native English speaker. Many language learners focus only on vocabulary, grammar, or pronunciation, but thinking like a native speaker goes beyond memorization. It's about understanding how the language works in context, how thoughts are expressed naturally, and how ideas flow in everyday conversations. In this story, you'll follow Alex, a determined learner who wanted to break the barriers of translation and internalize English in a way that made speaking, listening, and understanding effortless. Alex's goal was not only to speak correctly but to think in English, to recognize idiomatic expressions, understand cultural nuances, and respond naturally without mentally translating from their native language. Throughout the story, you will discover the strategies Alex uses to transform the way they process English, practicing with authentic materials, noticing thought patterns in native speech, internalizing phrases and expressions, using mental visualization, and gradually reducing dependence on translation. You'll also see how Alex overcomes challenges like hesitation, overthinking, and misunderstandings caused by cultural differences. By the end of this journey, you'll understand that thinking like a native speaker is not an innate talent but a skill that can be developed with practice, awareness, and consistent effort. Alex's story demonstrates how immersing oneself in English, actively observing how ideas are communicated, and training your mind to process language naturally can lead to fluency and confidence. This story is a blend of inspiration, practical advice, and real-life examples. It will guide you step by step on how to change your approach to English, making thinking in your native language unnecessary and speaking fluid, confident, and intuitive. Welcome to a journey where your thoughts gradually begin to flow in English, just like a native speaker. After deciding to think like a native speaker, Alex realized that understanding words and grammar wasn't enough. Native speakers don't translate in their minds. They process ideas, feelings, and intentions directly in English. Alex's first step was to observe how English speakers express common thoughts and emotions in everyday situations. Alex started with simple, daily expressions. Instead of saying, "I am feeling very tired today," in the literal way learned from textbooks, Alex noticed that native speakers often say, "I'm exhausted," or "I'm wiped out." These phrases convey the same idea more naturally, with less effort and more emotional nuance. By recording these expressions in a notebook, Alex began to internalize them, gradually replacing literal translations with authentic English phrases. Next, Alex paid attention to thought patterns behind questions and statements. English often prioritizes directness and clarity, but it also includes subtle hedges to soften statements, like, "I think," or "it seems." For example, instead of translating a native language equivalent of, "You are wrong," Alex noticed English speakers often say, "I'm not sure that's correct," or "I see it differently." Understanding these thought patterns helped Alex sound more natural and polite in conversation. Alex also started observing internal speech in English. While reading or watching videos, they practiced pausing to think in English instead of translating from their native language. Simple thoughts like, "I need coffee," became automatic in English, bypassing translation. This small but consistent practice gradually rewired the way Alex processed language, training the brain to respond naturally in English. Idiomatic expressions became a key focus. Phrases like, "hit the nail on the head," or "a blessing in disguise," didn't make sense word for word, but native speakers used them effortlessly. Alex learned to associate these expressions with the ideas they represented rather than their literal translation. Over time, thinking of an idea automatically triggered the English phrase in Alex's mind, instead of a translated equivalent. Another strategy Alex used was listening actively to conversations. While watching movies, listening to podcasts, or observing people in public spaces, Alex concentrated not just on words but on how ideas were structured. Questions often followed a predictable pattern, responses included set phrases, and casual conversation flowed with connectors like, "So well," or "actually." Recognizing these patterns helped Alex anticipate responses and structure thoughts in English before speaking. Alex also practiced internal dialogues in English. During walks, daily chores, or waiting in line, Alex described actions, planned the day, and reflected on experiences using English. For instance, instead of thinking, "I need to finish my homework," Alex would automatically think, "I should get my homework done," or "I need to wrap up my homework." This practice made English thinking habitual, reducing hesitation and mental translation during real conversations. Finally, Alex began mimicking native speech patterns in writing as well. Writing short reflections or journal entries in English using natural phrases and thought structures reinforced thinking in English. Over time, this internalized both vocabulary and cognitive patterns of native speakers, making spontaneous speech easier and more fluent. Through these exercises, Alex realized that thinking like a native speaker is less about perfect grammar and more about adopting authentic expressions, cognitive patterns, and internalizing language habits. By recognizing how ideas are naturally expressed, Alex was laying the foundation for confident, fluid, and intuitive English communication. Having begun to recognize thought patterns and everyday expressions, Alex understood that exposure to natural English was essential for thinking like a native speaker. Simply studying phrases in isolation wasn't enough. The brain needed to hear and process English in real-life contexts. That's when Alex immersed fully in English media, movies, TV shows, podcasts, and conversations, and used them as a training ground for thought patterns. Alex started with movies and series that were rich in dialogue and everyday expressions. By focusing on scenes where characters interacted naturally, Alex paid attention not just to vocabulary, but to sentence structures, tone, intonation, and the flow of ideas. They observed how questions were asked, how opinions were expressed, and how small talk unfolded. Over time, Alex noticed that native speakers often condensed ideas, omitted words, and relied on context to convey meaning, which contrasted sharply with literal translations from textbooks. To internalize these patterns, Alex practiced mimicking conversations. They would pause a scene after a line and repeat it aloud, not just for pronunciation, but to reproduce the rhythm, intonation, and emotional tone of the speaker. At first, this felt challenging. Some phrases were fast, some accents were unfamiliar, and certain expressions seemed unusual. But consistent practice made these patterns familiar and intuitive. Alex also shadowed dialogues, speaking simultaneously with characters to match speed and pronunciation. Shadowing improved both listening and speaking skills, helping Alex internalize sentence structures and natural phrasing. Unlike rote memorization, shadowing allowed Alex to feel how thoughts naturally flow in English, making it easier to replicate in real conversations. Podcasts and audio stories were another critical tool. Listening to native speakers narrate experiences, explain concepts, or discuss daily life helped Alex understand how ideas are structured in spoken English. Alex would pause and summarize what was heard in their own words, first silently in English, then aloud. This practice reinforced cognitive translation, thinking in English rather than converting from their native language. Alex also created mini-role plays inspired by media. After watching a scene, they imagined themselves as one of the characters, improvising responses or continuing the dialogue in English. This not only reinforced vocabulary and expressions but also trained the brain to generate thoughts directly in English, bypassing translation. Over time, even spontaneous speech in daily life began to reflect the patterns Alex had practiced with media. Another key insight was noticing connectors and discourse markers, words like, "well, actually, so," and "you know," that make speech sound natural. These small words often don't translate directly but are essential for thinking and speaking like a native. By practicing their use in mimicry and role-playing, Alex could structure thoughts in English in a fluid and authentic way. Immersion also extended to cultural nuances. By observing social interactions in media, how people greet, joke, or express disagreement, Alex gained context for natural English thought processes. Understanding context allowed them to anticipate likely responses, make culturally appropriate statements, and think ahead during conversations. Through consistent immersion and mimicry, Alex gradually trained their mind to process English directly. The brain began to recognize patterns, anticipate phrasing, and generate ideas naturally in English. Movies, podcasts, and conversations weren't just entertainment. They became a laboratory for thought, enabling Alex to move from translation-based thinking to spontaneous, native-like cognition. By the end of this stage, Alex felt a subtle but powerful change. The mental effort required to speak in English decreased, sentences flowed more naturally, and comprehension of fast, authentic speech improved dramatically. Thinking in English was becoming second nature, the first true step towards speaking like a native speaker. As Alex became more comfortable mimicking native speech patterns, they realized that thinking like a native speaker involved more than repeating phrases. It required training the mind to process ideas in English directly. One of the most effective techniques Alex discovered was mental visualization and thought conversion. Instead of silently translating from their native language, Alex began to imagine situations and describe them in English. For example, while walking in a park, instead of thinking, "I see a dog chasing a ball," in their native language and translating it, Alex visualized the scene and automatically formed the sentence in English. "A dog is running after the ball." By connecting mental images directly to English expressions, the translation step gradually disappeared. Alex also practiced narrating daily activities in English internally. Tasks like cooking, cleaning, or planning the day became opportunities to think in English. "I need to boil water for tea," or "I should make a grocery list." This constant internal dialogue created a natural English thought pattern, training the brain to process the language automatically. Visualization wasn't limited to physical actions. Alex also visualized conversations, imagining dialogues with friends, colleagues, or strangers entirely in English. They practiced responding to questions, giving opinions, and expressing emotions, all mentally in English. Over time, these exercises made spontaneous speech easier, as the brain had already practiced thinking and responding in English scenarios. Another aspect of mental conversion involved rephrasing ideas in multiple ways. Alex would take a simple thought, like, "I'm tired," and practice expressing it differently. "I'm exhausted, I feel worn out," or "I need a rest." This technique expanded vocabulary and created flexibility in thinking, allowing Alex to express the same idea in varied, natural ways depending on context. Alex also incorporated emotions into visualization. When imagining a conversation, they would not only consider the words but also tone, facial expressions, and gestures. This helped link English words with real-life emotional context, making thought conversion more holistic and realistic. By mentally acting out scenarios, Alex trained both cognition and emotional expression simultaneously. To reinforce this skill, Alex used flashbacks from movies or stories they knew well. They imagined themselves in scenes, recreated dialogues in their mind, and experimented with different responses. This practice helped them internalize language structures and native-like thought processes without relying on written text or translation. Over weeks, mental visualization became second nature. Alex noticed that when encountering new situations, their mind automatically began thinking in English. Sentences flowed more easily, responses were quicker, and hesitation decreased. What initially required deliberate effort now felt like intuitive thought. By combining visualization with previous practices, mimicking speech, immersion, and role-playing, Alex built a robust internal framework for thinking like a native speaker. The mind had been trained to process ideas, emotions, and interactions directly in English, paving the way for natural fluency. Through mental visualization and thought conversion, Alex reached a critical milestone. English was no longer just a language they studied, it became the language they thought in. This shift marked a profound step toward internalizing native-like cognition and achieving confident, fluid communication. With mental visualization and thought conversion becoming a habit, Alex realized that expanding vocabulary was essential to think like a native speaker. But instead of memorizing isolated words, Alex focused on learning vocabulary in context and recognizing patterns in how words were used. This approach allowed ideas to form naturally in English without translation. Alex began by observing how words appeared in conversations, movies, and articles. Instead of simply noting the word astonished, Alex paid attention to sentences like, "She was astonished by the news," and "I couldn't help but be astonished at the view." Seeing words in different contexts helped Alex understand nuances, connotations, and proper usage, which was far more effective than memorizing dictionary definitions. Next, Alex started grouping words by patterns and categories. For example, verbs describing emotions, like thrilled, frustrated, confident, were studied together. Alex practiced using these words in different sentences, imagining scenarios where each could be naturally applied. This method not only increased vocabulary but also built flexible thinking, allowing Alex to select the most appropriate word instinctively. Idiomatic expressions and collocations became another focus. Alex noticed that native speakers rarely combine words randomly. Certain words naturally go together. Phrases like, "make a decision, take a break," or "catch someone's attention," repeated across movies and conversations. By learning these combinations, Alex could form sentences that sounded natural without overthinking grammar. Over time, these patterns became automatic, forming a mental toolkit of ready-to-use expressions. Alex also leveraged repetition and spaced review. New words or phrases were revisited regularly, both in writing and in mental exercises. They practiced using the same word in multiple contexts, in thoughts, imagined conversations, and real-life interactions. For example, after learning fascinated, Alex might think, "I'm fascinated by astronomy," or "she seemed fascinated by the story." This constant reinforcement ensured that vocabulary was not just recognized but actively used in thought and speech. Reading and listening were key sources for contextual learning. Alex read short stories, watched interviews, and listened to podcasts, focusing on how words were used naturally. When encountering unfamiliar words, they didn't stop to translate. Instead, Alex inferred meaning from context, predicted possible continuations, and mentally rehearsed the phrase in English. This approach trained the brain to process language natively rather than relying on literal translation. Alex also practiced paraphrasing. For each new word or phrase, they created multiple sentences expressing similar ideas. For instance, after learning exhilarated, Alex practiced, "I felt exhilarated after the hike, the roller coaster left me exhilarated," and "she looked exhilarated by the performance." Paraphrasing strengthened the mental association of words with ideas and emotions, making it easier to recall and use them spontaneously. Furthermore, Alex integrated vocabulary into internal dialogues and visualization exercises. While imagining scenes or planning their day, they deliberately inserted newly learned words and expressions. Thinking in context reinforced native-like thought patterns and helped vocabulary become an automatic part of cognition. Through these methods, Alex discovered that vocabulary building isn't just about learning more words, it's about learning how words function together, how they express ideas, and how they flow naturally in thought. By mastering vocabulary in context and recognizing patterns, Alex trained their mind to select words instinctively, forming fluent, native-like thinking in English. By the end of this stage, Alex could express nuanced thoughts, feelings, and ideas more naturally, without pausing to search for words or translate from their native language. Vocabulary became a living tool, enabling confident, spontaneous, and fluent thinking in English. After building a strong foundation of vocabulary, mental visualization, and contextual understanding, Alex realized that thinking like a native speaker required active practice in real conversational settings. While movies, podcasts, and internal exercises were invaluable, they needed to experience the flow of live communication, including pauses, interruptions, and spontaneous responses. Alex began by simulating real-life conversations through role-playing. They imagined various scenarios, ordering food at a restaurant, asking for directions, attending a meeting, or chatting with a friend. For each scenario, Alex practiced both sides of the dialogue, predicting questions and formulating responses in English. This practice allowed them to anticipate language patterns and respond naturally without pausing to translate. Next, Alex sought conversation partners. They joined language exchange groups online and met native speakers willing to converse regularly. In these interactions, Alex focused on thinking directly in English rather than translating mentally. At first, it was challenging. Questions sometimes caught them off guard, and expressions they had learned from media didn't always fit the context. But every conversation was a learning opportunity. Alex also incorporated improvisation into role-playing. Instead of rehearsing fixed responses, they practiced responding in real time to unexpected questions or comments. This encouraged flexibility and trained the mind to process ideas in English spontaneously. For example, if a partner asked, "What's your favorite memory from childhood?" Alex practiced responding using natural phrases and varied vocabulary, thinking in English as the answer formed. To further enhance natural thinking, Alex recorded conversations and listened back. They noted moments where translation or hesitation occurred and analyzed why. Perhaps a word or expression was unfamiliar, or a thought pattern hadn't yet been internalized. By reviewing these moments, Alex could target weak spots and improve accuracy and fluency. Alex also practiced incorporating idioms, phrasal verbs, and natural connectors in conversation. Phrases like, "Come to think of it, that reminds me," or "at the end of the day," were added to responses. This not only made speech more native-like but also reinforced thought patterns. When thinking in English, Alex naturally reached for these expressions, which made communication smoother and more fluid. Body language, tone, and facial expressions became part of the practice. Alex observed how native speakers paired gestures and intonation with speech, and practiced doing the same. This alignment of verbal and nonverbal cues strengthened cognitive processing, allowing Alex to think and act in English simultaneously, as native speakers do. Another key strategy was reflection after conversations. Alex would review interactions, recalling moments of hesitation, new words used, or expressions that worked well. They wrote these reflections in English, further reinforcing thought patterns and building a feedback loop that connected experience, cognition, and practice. Through consistent role-playing and real conversations, Alex's thinking in English became automatic. Sentences formed naturally, vocabulary was selected instinctively, and comprehension of native speakers improved dramatically. Mistakes became part of the learning process, not a source of fear, allowing confidence to grow alongside fluency. By the end of this stage, Alex realized that active conversational practice was the bridge between internalized thought patterns and real-world fluency. Thinking like a native speaker wasn't just a mental exercise, it was about experiencing language dynamically, engaging with others, and using English as a living, functional tool for communication. As Alex gained confidence in real conversations, they discovered that thinking like a native speaker required more than vocabulary, grammar, and fluency. It demanded an understanding of cultural nuances and implicit meanings. Language is deeply intertwined with culture, and expressions often carry subtleties that go beyond literal translation. To truly think like a native speaker, Alex needed to grasp not just what was said, but what was implied. Alex began observing how native speakers use tone, context, and word choice to convey subtle meaning. For instance, when someone said, "That's interesting," it could be genuine curiosity, polite acknowledgement, or even skepticism, depending on intonation and body language. Alex realized that comprehending these nuances was essential to avoid misinterpretation and to respond naturally in conversation. Idioms and colloquial expressions often reflected cultural context. Phrases like, "hit the nail on the head, spill the beans," or "kick the bucket," made little sense if interpreted literally. Alex learned to associate these expressions with the ideas they conveyed rather than their literal translation, internalizing their usage in the appropriate context. This helped Alex process English thoughts more naturally, as they could now understand underlying meanings without pausing to interpret. Politeness, humor, and social conventions were another focus. Alex noticed that native speakers often softened statements with phrases like, "I guess, perhaps," or "you know," and used humor to ease tension or create rapport. Observing these patterns, Alex practiced incorporating them into their own speech, enhancing the flow of thought and making interactions feel authentic. Alex also paid attention to pragmatic language, how language is used in specific situations. Requests, offers, and apologies were rarely direct. Instead, they followed socially accepted norms. For example, instead of saying, "Give me the salt," a native speaker might say, "Could you pass me the salt, please?" Alex learned to anticipate these patterns and automatically structure thoughts and responses in culturally appropriate ways. Movies, TV shows, and podcasts became valuable tools for observing these nuances. Alex watched how characters communicated emotions, jokes, and subtle cues. They practiced mimicking not only words but gestures, tone, and timing. By repeatedly observing and practicing, Alex's mind began to process English as native speakers do, understanding both explicit statements and implied meanings. Another technique Alex used was role-play with culturally embedded scenarios. They simulated situations like attending a party, joining a business meeting, or giving compliments. Each scenario required understanding social cues, indirect expressions, and context-specific language. By practicing these scenarios mentally and in conversation, Alex internalized culturally appropriate thought patterns. Through these exercises, Alex discovered that thinking like a native speaker isn't only about mastering words, it's about perceiving language holistically. Understanding nuance, context, and implied meaning allowed Alex to interpret messages quickly and respond naturally, without translating or overthinking. Conversations became more intuitive, fluid, and culturally aware. By the end of this stage, Alex could anticipate implied meanings, adjust tone, and use idiomatic expressions naturally. Language had transformed from a set of rules and words into a dynamic tool for communication. Thinking in English now included cultural awareness, enabling Alex to engage with native speakers confidently and authentically. By this stage of Alex's journey, they had developed a strong foundation in vocabulary, thought patterns, cultural understanding, and real-life conversational skills. However, Alex knew that fluency and native-like thinking required constant reinforcement. The brain needed repeated exposure, active review, and practice to retain patterns, expressions, and the natural flow of English. Alex implemented a structured review system. They revisited conversations, media clips, and role-play exercises from previous weeks, practicing the same phrases, sentence structures, and thought patterns repeatedly. By reinforcing what had been learned, Alex strengthened memory retention and built automaticity, allowing sentences and ideas to flow without conscious effort. Repetition was paired with active engagement. Alex didn't just reread dialogues or replay scenes, they spoke aloud, practiced shadowing, and improvised alternative responses. This active involvement ensured that learning was not passive but internalized through experience. For example, a line from a movie, "I can't believe you did that," was practiced in multiple contexts: surprise, disbelief, or playful teasing. Each repetition embedded the phrase into Alex's natural thought patterns. Flashcards and spaced repetition were another tool. Alex created cards for idioms, phrasal verbs, and commonly used expressions. Reviewing them regularly, with intervals gradually increasing over time, ensured long-term retention. This technique allowed Alex to recall phrases instantly, making thinking in English faster and more fluid. Alex also recorded themselves speaking and listened critically. They identified areas where hesitation occurred, pronunciation needed adjustment, or expressions could be improved. Reflecting on these recordings helped Alex refine mental patterns, correct subtle mistakes, and internalize authentic phrasing. Peer practice remained essential. Alex participated in conversation groups, discussing familiar topics and reflecting on past scenarios. They observed how others used language naturally, adopted effective expressions, and compared their own thought processes with those of native speakers. Engaging with peers reinforced learning and encouraged confidence in applying English spontaneously. Additionally, Alex revisited mental visualization exercises. By imagining conversations, daily routines, and problem-solving scenarios, Alex continued to strengthen direct English thought patterns. Each repetition made thinking in English faster, smoother, and more instinctive. Over time, mental translation from their native language became nearly non-existent. Another aspect of active review was paraphrasing. Alex regularly rephrased ideas, using alternative vocabulary and sentence structures. For instance, "I'm excited for the trip" could become, "I'm looking forward to the trip," or "The trip has me thrilled." This flexibility reinforced thinking in English rather than relying on fixed translations. Through consistent repetition, active review, and multi-context practice, Alex noticed a profound shift. Sentences formed automatically, comprehension of fast or colloquial speech improved, and responses in conversation became immediate and natural. Fluency was no longer a distant goal, it had become a habitual part of thinking and communicating. By the end of this stage, Alex understood that reinforcement was key to sustaining native-like thinking. Learning English wasn't a linear process but a continuous cycle of exposure, practice, and review. With repetition and active engagement, language patterns became deeply ingrained, allowing Alex to navigate complex conversations effortlessly and think in English with confidence. After months of immersive practice, vocabulary building, cultural observation, and repeated review, Alex reached the stage where thinking like a native speaker was no longer just an exercise, it became a skill to be applied in real-life situations. This stage was about testing the mind's ability to process English spontaneously and naturally in everyday interactions. Alex began integrating native-like thinking into social interactions. At work, they participated in meetings entirely in English, listening and responding without mental translation. Instead of formulating sentences in their native language first, Alex thought directly in English, using idiomatic expressions, connectors, and culturally appropriate phrasing they had internalized. The difference was noticeable. Responses were quicker, more fluid, and confident. In casual settings, Alex practiced small talk and spontaneous dialogue. Greeting neighbors, chatting at the coffee shop, or discussing hobbies with friends became opportunities to apply native thinking. Each interaction reinforced sentence structures, expressions, and thought patterns learned from media, role-playing, and visualization. Over time, these patterns felt automatic, allowing Alex to focus on ideas rather than word choice. Travel provided another rich environment. During trips to English-speaking cities, Alex immersed in the language fully. Ordering food, asking for directions, and navigating public transportation all required real-time processing. Instead of translating phrases, Alex relied on instinctive English thought patterns developed through months of practice. Mistakes were minimal, and comprehension of local accents and idioms improved dramatically. Alex also tackled challenging conversations. Discussions involving complex opinions, abstract topics, or nuanced humor tested their ability to think flexibly in English. Using paraphrasing, active recall, and mental visualization, Alex was able to navigate these conversations successfully, often responding in ways that sounded natural even to native speakers. One crucial insight was the use of mental shortcuts. Alex's brain now automatically drew on patterns, collocations, and idiomatic expressions appropriate to context. This reduced hesitation, improved fluency, and made speech sound authentic. Native-like thinking became a mental toolkit, ready to handle unexpected situations, questions, or cultural nuances seamlessly. Alex continued to refine pronunciation, intonation, and emotional expression in parallel. By aligning thoughts with voice and body language, they ensured that communication was not only linguistically accurate but also expressive and engaging. Conversations became more meaningful, as Alex could convey tone, humor, and subtle emotion naturally. Feedback and reflection remained part of the process. Alex reviewed interactions, noting effective phrases, expressions that worked, and moments that could be improved. This reflective practice allowed them to continuously adapt, ensuring that native thinking evolved alongside new experiences and contexts. By applying native thinking to real-life situations, Alex experienced a transformative shift. English was no longer a learned subject or a foreign skill, it was a living, intuitive mode of thought. Conversations became effortless, comprehension of spoken and written English reached new levels, and confidence soared. Alex realized that thinking like a native speaker is both a mindset and a habit, cultivated through immersion, practice, cultural understanding, and active engagement. By bridging the gap between study and real-life application, they had unlocked a level of fluency that made English a natural extension of thought, ready to be used in any situation, anywhere. As Alex looked back on the journey, they felt a sense of achievement and clarity. What had started as a goal to think like a native speaker had evolved into a lifestyle of active engagement, cultural understanding, and intuitive use of English. The process had been gradual, challenging, and immersive, but each step, recognizing thought patterns, practicing visualization, building contextual vocabulary, role-playing, and applying skills in real life, had contributed to a transformation in the way Alex processed language. Alex realized that thinking like a native speaker is not an innate talent but a cultivated skill. It requires consistent practice, exposure, and reflection. By internalizing phrases, understanding cultural nuances, and training the mind to process ideas directly in English, Alex could now converse naturally, respond spontaneously, and comprehend subtle meanings without the crutch of mental translation. The journey emphasized the importance of context and authenticity. Learning vocabulary in isolation, memorizing grammar rules, or relying solely on textbooks would never have produced the same results. Instead, combining observation, immersion, active engagement, and reflection created a holistic approach. English became a living language in Alex's mind, capable of expressing complex ideas, emotions, and humor with fluidity. Mistakes, once feared, became tools for growth. Each misstep in conversation, each hesitation, provided insight into areas for improvement. Alex learned to embrace challenges, experiment with new expressions, and adapt quickly to different conversational contexts. Confidence grew alongside fluency, reinforcing the connection between thought and speech. Alex also understood the importance of continuous exposure. Media, conversations, travel, and reading remained integral to maintaining and enhancing native-like thinking. The mind needed constant reinforcement to retain natural phrasing, cultural awareness, and fluency. Alex created a personal routine of ongoing practice, ensuring that English remained a dynamic and intuitive part of daily life. Ultimately, thinking like a native speaker became more than a linguistic goal, it became a way of interacting with the world. Ideas flowed naturally, comprehension deepened, and communication became richer and more meaningful. Alex's story demonstrates that fluency is not just about language proficiency, it's about thinking, perceiving, and responding in ways that reflect native patterns of thought and understanding. The journey also offered a valuable lesson to every learner. Fluency is attainable through dedication, creativity, and strategic practice. By immersing yourself in language, internalizing thought patterns, and actively applying skills, you can transform English from a studied subject into an intuitive, natural tool. Alex's success illustrates that anyone, with patience and commitment, can think like a native speaker, communicate confidently, and enjoy the profound rewards of language mastery. In the end, English became not just a language for Alex, but a lens through which the world could be understood, experienced, and shared. Thinking like a native speaker is a lifelong process, but with consistent practice, reflection, and engagement, it is a skill that opens doors, deepens understanding, and enriches every interaction in the journey of learning.